Snow fell softly over the edge of Leavenworth, Washington, quiet enough to make every sound feel like a secret. Inside a lonely cabin, Navy SEAL Daniel Miller had learned to live with silence. Then came 3 knocks at his door. On the porch stood an elderly woman, trembling beneath a worn coat. Beside her waited a mother German shepherd, guarding 2 tiny puppies against the cold. But it was the blue suitcase in the woman's hand that Daniel could not stop staring at. Why had she carried it through the snow? Why did the mother dog refuse to let anyone touch it? And what old promise was hidden inside? This is a fictional story created for storytelling purposes. Before we begin, tell me, where are you watching from? Drop your country in the comments below. Late winter lay over Leavenworth, Washington, with the soft stubbornness of an old hymn that refused to end. Snow rested on the pine branches above Icicle Creek, gathered along the split-rail fences, and softened the road that climbs toward Daniel Miller's cabin at the edge of the woods. The town below still had its warm bakery windows, its carved wooden signs, its tourists taking pictures beneath Bavarian rooftops. But up here, the world narrowed to cedar smoke, white ground, and a silence so complete that a man could hear his own thoughts sharpening themselves. Daniel Miller had chosen that silence on purpose. At 40, he was still built like the Navy SEAL he had been for most of his adult life, tall, broad-shouldered, and spare in the waist, with dark brown hair cut close, a little silver beginning at the temples, and a neatly trimmed beard that did not quite soften the hard angles of his jaw. His gray eyes were the kind that noticed exits before curtains, tire tracks before scenery, and lies before they finished dressing themselves as politeness. People in town called him respectful. Some called him distant. The kinder ones said he was adjusting. Daniel did not correct them. A man could hide many things behind a quiet nod and a stack of firewood. The cabin had belonged to his grandmother, Evelyn Miller, a tall, gentle woman with white hair, blue church dresses, and hands that always smelled faintly of bread flour and pine soap. Years ago, Evelyn had run Willow Lantern House, an old community home near the lower road where women, children, widows, and stranded travelers had once found soup, blankets, and a porch light left burning through winter storms. Daniel remembered her laughing in that house, remembered people coming through its doors with red hands and embarrassed faces, remembered how she treated receiving help as something holy rather than shameful. He also remembered the roof leaking, the foundation shifting, the taxes rising, and the repair estimates piling up like snow against a locked door. His sister, Rebecca Miller, had called 3 times that week. Rebecca was 36, practical and sharp-minded with straight chestnut hair usually pinned behind one ear, a slim face, and the tired patience of a woman who had learned to love her brother without trusting his judgment. She lived down in Wenatchee, worked as an accountant, and believed numbers were kinder than nostalgia, because numbers at least told the truth without trembling. "Daniel," she had said that morning, "Grandma's house is falling apart. A resort company wants the land. If we wait, we lose money we do not have." She was not wrong. That was the worst part. Daniel had been standing at his kitchen counter, staring at the envelope from the town council, when the first knock came. Not loud, not desperate. 3 small taps against the cabin door, followed by a silence that seemed to listen back. Daniel looked toward the window. Snow moved beyond the glass in slow, pale sheets. No headlights, no engine, no reason for anyone to be up his road without calling first. His right hand went still on the mug he had not yet lifted. Old training woke in his bones before kindness did. He crossed the room without rushing and looked through the narrow side window. On the porch stood an elderly woman in a worn, brown wool coat, too thin for the mountain air. She was small, but not frail, in the helpless way people like to imagine old women. She held herself stiffly, almost proudly, as if dignity were the last warm thing she owned. Her name was Margaret Lawson, though most people had once called her Maggie. She was 78, with silver hair tucked beneath a faded green knit hat, pale skin weathered by years of wind and worry, and blue eyes that still had sparks in them. though the fire had clearly cost her something. One gloved hand gripped the handle of an old blue suitcase. The other held a leash looped around the neck of a German Shepherd mother dog. The dog was a sable-coated female, about 4 years old, with a black saddle across her back, cream fur along her chest and legs, and amber eyes bright with exhaustion and suspicion. Later, Daniel would learn her name was Hazel. In that first moment, she was only a mother standing between the world and 2 tiny lives. A bundle moved at the woman's feet, 2 German Shepherd puppies tucked inside a gray wool blanket, no more than 6 or 7 weeks old. One, a sturdy black and tan male with bold little paws, pushed his nose out as if personally offended by winter. The other, smaller and quieter, shivered so deeply that the blanket trembled around her. Daniel opened the door before he decided to. Cold stepped into the cabin like an uninvited judge. The elderly woman did not step forward. Hazel did, but only halfway, planting her paws over the edge of the blanket as if Daniel might have opened the door merely to steal what was hers. "Mrs. Lawson?" Daniel asked. He knew her by sight, the way small towns made strangers familiar. She had taught music at the Methodist Church for decades, wore lipstick even to buy milk, and had once corrected the mayor's singing during a Christmas fundraiser. People said she had grown difficult after her husband died. Daniel suspected she had always been difficult, and grief had merely stopped asking her to disguise it. "I need Daniel Miller," she said. Her voice was thin from the cold, but firm enough to cut kindling. "You found him." Her eyes moved over his face, measuring him with almost comic suspicion. "You are younger than I expected." "Sorry to disappoint you." "I did not say disappointed." The stronger puppy sneezed. The smaller one made a faint sound, not quite a cry, barely more than a question asked by something too cold to form words. Daniel's refusal, which had been gathering behind his teeth, broke apart. "Come inside." Maggie looked past him into the cabin toward the stove, the stacked wood, the clean but lonely table. For one strange second, Daniel had the feeling she was not deciding whether to trust him. She was deciding whether she could bear to be helped. "I am not lost," she said. "I did not say you were." "I know whose cabin this is. I know who your grandmother was. Evelyn Miller gave me shelter once, a long time ago, and I paid her back by vanishing like an ungrateful fool." Her mouth tightened. "Tomorrow morning the town will vote on selling Willow Lantern House." "They must not." Daniel felt the old house enter the room before the woman did. Willow Lantern House. The name carried dust, soup, hymnals, unpaid bills, and his grandmother's voice telling him to leave the porch light on because a person did not always know when someone else was walking through the worst night of their life. "I am aware of the meeting," he said carefully. "Then you are aware they will listen to you. The land is in your family's name. They will listen to repair costs, they will listen to taxes. They will listen to my sister, who is usually right." Maggie lifted the blue suitcase a few inches, then set it down with a tired thump. "Then perhaps they should also listen to the names of the people that house saved." Hazel swayed. Daniel saw it then. The dog was holding herself upright by will alone. Snow had frozen into the longer fur along her legs, and her ribs showed faintly beneath her damp coat. Still, when Daniel shifted his weight, Hazel lowered her head and gave one low, warning growl. Not vicious, not wild. Maternal. A queen with no kingdom left but 2 shivering heirs and a blue suitcase. Daniel stepped back, palms open. "Easy." Maggie's face changed when she looked at the dog. The sharpness softened, but only for a heartbeat. "Hazel does not trust quickly." "Smart dog." "She has had reason." Daniel did not ask. Not yet. Some stories came out only after warmth did its work. He brought towels from the laundry shelf, moving slowly, keeping his eyes away from the puppies when Hazel watched too closely. He set the towels near the stove, then backed off, Maggie guided Hazel inside with small murmurs. The mother dog circled once, collapsed near the heat, and immediately nosed the blanket until both puppies were against her belly. The bold one pawed clumsily at the air. The smaller one barely moved. "That little one," Daniel said. "Pearl," Maggie answered too quickly, as if the name itself were a shield. "The boy is Benny." Benny objected to the world with a squeak. Pearl only trembled. Daniel looked at the phone on the wall, then at Maggie. "We should call a vet." "In a moment." Maggie's gloved fingers still gripped the suitcase handle. "First, I need you to promise you will take me to Willow Lantern House before the meeting." "I do not make promises before I understand what they cost." A dry smile touched Maggie's lips. "Your grandmother said nearly the same thing once. Then she fed me anyway." That struck closer than Daniel liked. He bent to lift the suitcase, expecting it to be light. It was not. Whatever Maggie carried had weight beyond paper and old cloth. As he set it near the stove, Hazel lurched up with a sudden growl and dragged the suitcase closer to the puppies by the handle, using the last of her strength, as though the blue case belonged in the nest with them. The movement pulled the cracked lid open. Inside, beneath folded letters and a faded quilt square, Daniel saw an old paper label stitched to the lining in careful blue thread. "Willow Lantern House," he read aloud, his voice lower now. "Names of those who came through the snow." Maggie closed her eyes. For the first time since she had knocked, the proud old woman looked not cold, not stubborn, but afraid of the mercy she had carried all the way to his door. Night settled over the cabin without ceremony, pressing its white palms against the windows, while the fire worked patiently in the black iron stove. Outside, the pines bent under snow and wind, but inside, Daniel Miller moved with the controlled precision of a man who had turned order into a second language. He laid 2 towels near the hearth, then moved them 6 inches farther away because direct heat could harm chilled animals. He warmed water in a dented kettle, tested it against the inside of his wrist, set a shallow bowl on the floor, then stepped back before Hazel could decide his hands were a threat. He did not speak much. His silence was not peaceful. It had corners. Maggie Lawson sat in the wooden chair closest to the stove, her old brown coat still buttoned because pride sometimes took longer to thaw than flesh. Snow had melted along the hem and dripped onto Daniel's floor in a small, dark crescent. Her silver hair had escaped the green mitt hat in wisps, and the cold had left her cheeks pale except for 2 sharp spots of red high on the bone. She watched Daniel with the shrewd eyes of a retired music teacher who had once caught boys pretending to sing in the back pew. "You fold towels like they are about to be inspected by the Secretary of Defense," she said. Daniel glanced down at the stack beside his boot. "Is that a complaint?" "It is an observation. A complaint would have more feeling." Benny, the sturdier German Shepherd puppy, chose that moment to wobble out from the blanket and clamp his tiny mouth around Daniel's shoelace. The pup growled with the confidence of a creature who had mistaken string for a dragon. Daniel looked down, expression unreadable. Maggie waited for him to laugh. He did not. But after a second, he carefully untied the lace and let Benny keep the end. "Hostile engagement," Daniel said. "Low threat level." Maggie made a dry sound that might have been laughter if it had not been so rusty. "Careful, that one looks ambitious." Hazel watched them both. The mother German Shepherd lay curled around Pearl, her sable fur damp and lifting in uneven ridges as warmth returned to her body. Ice had melted from the feathering along her legs, leaving her paws raw-looking and muddy against the towel. She was not a gentle picture of gratitude. Her amber eyes followed every movement Daniel made. When he came too close with a bowl of softened food, Hazel's lips lifted just enough to show a warning line of teeth. Daniel stopped immediately. Not froze, not challenged. Stopped. He lowered himself to one knee, set the bowl down, and slid it across the floor with 2 fingers. Then he backed away and sat against the cabinet, broad shoulders pressed to the wood, palms open on his thighs. It went against every old instinct he had. In his other life, waiting had meant risk. Delay could become loss. Hesitation could turn a doorway into a grave. But Hazel did not need a breach team. She needed proof that no hand in this room would take what belonged to her. Maggie noticed. "That is better." Daniel kept his eyes on the stove. "Did not know I was being graded." "Everyone is being graded by a mother dog." Hazel sniffed the food only after Daniel had been still for a full minute. She ate one mouthful, then stopped to nose Pearl closer to her belly. Pearl's small body trembled beneath the blanket, a pale-bellied black and tan pup with a narrow face, soft ears still too large for her head, and the fragile look of something the world had almost misplaced. Benny shoved blindly at Hazel's side, found warmth, and complained because it was not arranged to his liking. Pearl did not complain at all. That worried Daniel more than noise would have. He looked toward the phone on the kitchen wall, then toward the window where snow had begun covering the porch rail. The road down to Leavenworth would be passable for a truck if one knew the slope, but not good. The veterinary clinic in town would be closed, and the emergency number was pinned somewhere under old receipts on his refrigerator. He could call, he should call. But Maggie caught the direction of his gaze. "She was stronger this morning," Maggie said. And there it was, the thing old people often did when fear came too near. They offered yesterday as evidence against the present. "Pearl ate a little before we left." "You walked them up here from town?" "From the lower road. A neighbor gave us a ride part way." "What neighbor?" Maggie looked away. Daniel let the silence stand. It was one of the few tools he still trusted. After a while, she said, "A man from the church. He did not ask questions. I did not offer answers." "That suitcase seems to have answers." Her fingers tightened around the arm of the chair. The blue suitcase sat beside the stove now, close enough for firelight to show the scratches across its faded leather and the places where the corners had been repaired with mismatched thread. "It has names," she said. "Names are not the same as answers." "You said Willow Lantern House helped someone you knew." "It did." Daniel turned his head and looked at her then. He had not survived this long by missing the small breaks in a voice. Maggie Lawson could sharpen words until they drew blood, but this sentence had no blade. It was small, tired, almost young. "Someone you knew," he repeated. Maggie lifted her chin. "You have your grandmother's way of asking without asking." "And you have a way of not answering." "That is because I am old enough to know answers can make people greedy. Give a man one truth and he starts digging for the rest like a terrier under a fence." Then he sneezed against Daniel's boot. Daniel gently slid his foot back before Hazel could object. "I am not a terrier." "No, you are more like a locked barn. Large, useful, and determined to pretend nothing inside is making noise." That one landed closer than he liked. Daniel rose too quickly, not enough to startle Hazel, but enough for Maggie to see it. He took another log from the stack and fed the stove. Sparks lifted behind the small glass window like fireflies trapped in a church lantern. His grandmother had loved that image. Evelyn Miller had believed every house needed one lamp visible from the road. Daniel had once thought that was sentimental. Now he owned 2 houses with lamps and did not know what either one was for. On the table lay the town council envelope, Rebecca's repair estimates, and the offer from Cascade Hearth Resorts. He had meant to sign the preliminary agreement tonight. Then Maggie had knocked. Then Hazel had looked at him like winter itself was standing behind her children. Daniel wondered, not for the first time, whether mercy always arrived at the least convenient hour, because convenience gave a man too many ways to refuse it. Maggie's gaze had drifted to the papers. "Your sister wants to sell." "She wants us not to drown in a building we cannot afford." "That is not an unkind wish." "No." "Practical people are often mistaken for hard ones. Sometimes they are only tired of watching dreamers leave bills on the table." Daniel looked at her, surprised by the fairness of it. "You know Rebecca?" "I know women who have had to be practical because someone else was busy being noble." The cabin grew quiet after that, but not empty. Hazel ate twice more. Benny fell asleep with Daniel's shoelace still trapped beneath one paw. Maggie removed her hat at last and folded it in her lap, revealing hair pinned with 2 old black clips. Daniel found the emergency veterinary number and wrote it on a notepad, then checked Pearl's gums the way the clinic recording advised, with Maggie holding Hazel's collar loosely and murmuring to the dog in a voice that had lost its thorns. Pearl stirred but would not latch. Near midnight, the wind shifted. It came down the chimney in a low note that made the stovepipe hum. Hazel lifted her head. Pearl's trembling had changed from small shivers to something weaker, farther apart. Maggie moved from the chair to the floor with difficulty, one hand gripping the table, the other pressed against her hip. Age did not defeat her all at once. It taxed her in small humiliations and made her pay in front of witnesses. Daniel started forward to help, then stopped when she glanced up. He understood that look. A person could need help and resent the shape of needing it. Maggie settled beside the towels and tucked Pearl closer to Hazel's warmth. "Come on, little Pearl," she whispered. "No oyster ever had an easy beginning." Daniel stood in the kitchen doorway, phone in hand, thumb hovering over the emergency number. The cabin felt suddenly too small for his training, too tender for commands. Maggie bowed her head and began to sing. The song was old, older than the paint on church basements, older than the polite lies families told to survive Sunday dinner. Her voice was rough and thin, but it carried. It moved over Hazel's ears, over Benny's sleeping paws, over Pearl's barely moving body, and into the rafters where Daniel had stored years of unsaid things. He did not know the hymn at first, then he did. His grandmother had hummed it while kneading dough at Willow Lantern House back when Daniel was a boy, and believed adults were strong because they never seemed afraid. Hazel stopped growling. Pearl's tiny mouth opened once against the blanket. Daniel did not move. For the first time in years, his cabin no longer felt like the cold deck of a ship after a mission, scrubbed clean of everything but survival. It felt like a house, trying, painfully and imperfectly, to breathe again. Dawn came pale and reluctant over the Cascades, not bright enough to end the storm, only strong enough to reveal what the night had left behind. Snow clung to Daniel Miller's porch rails in thick white bands, and the road below the cabin had vanished beneath a smooth, dangerous crust. Inside, the fire had burned down to a red heart. Hazel slept in short, guarded spells beside the stove, her sable body curved around Benny and Pearl as if she were trying to rebuild the world with warmth alone. Then he had wedged himself half under Hazel's front leg, mouth twitching in some brave puppy dream. Pearl was still weak, but she had survived the night. That small fact changed the room. It did not make anyone cheerful, it simply gave everyone permission to keep trying. Daniel stood at the kitchen counter, pouring coffee he did not want into 2 mismatched mugs. He had not slept. At 40, he knew how to stay awake through cold, pain, and waiting, but civilian sleeplessness had a different cruelty. In the service, exhaustion usually had a purpose. Here it just sat beside him like an unpaid bill. His dark hair was flattened on one side from the chair where he had leaned back for 20 minutes without truly resting, and the silver at his temples looked sharper in the early light. He wore a faded navy thermal shirt, jeans, and wool socks, but still carried himself as if boots and orders might be required at any second. Maggie Lawson sat at his table, with the blue suitcase open before her. Without her coat, she seemed smaller, but not weaker. Her shoulders were narrow beneath a lavender cardigan gone fuzzy at the elbows, and her hands, knotted by age, moved over the papers with a careful reverence she had not shown toward her own comfort. She had slept even less than Daniel. The old hymn still seems to live in her throat, roughening each breath. When Daniel placed coffee beside her, she nodded once, as if gratitude were a language she understood but spoke with an accent. He waited until she had taken one sip. Your name is in that ledger." Maggie's hand stopped above the open suitcase. Daniel reached to the table and turned the old book gently so the page faced both of them. The handwriting was his grandmother's, neat and slanted, each name written as if the person mattered enough to be remembered properly. Near the middle of the page, beneath a date from more than 50 years earlier, Evelyn Miller had written, "Margaret Lawson, age 26, infant daughter Clara, winter shelter, medical assistance, follow-up needed." Maggie looked at the words for a long time. Hazel lifted her head, sensing a change no human had made aloud. "You said Willow Lantern House helped someone you knew," Daniel said. "It did." Maggie's mouth tightened. "I knew her better than anyone, and treated her worse than I would have treated a stranger." Daniel sat across from her. He did not press. He had learned the night before that Maggie's truth was like Hazel's trust. If approached too quickly, it bared teeth. Maggie looked toward the stove where Pearl shifted faintly against her mother. "I was 26 when I came through that door. Not old, not wise. Just proud enough to mistake fear for principle." She rubbed her thumb over the edge of the ledger. "My husband had left by then, Frank Lawson. Handsome man at first. Tall, black-haired, always clean-shaven, with a smile that made church ladies forgive him before he apologized. He could charm a room and empty a wallet in the same afternoon. When he was happy, the whole house had sunshine. When he was not, Clara and I learned to make ourselves small." Daniel's jaw tightened, but he said nothing. "He did not throw us into the snow like a villain in a cheap play," Maggie continued. "That would have been easier to hate. He simply spent the rent, disappeared for 3 days, came back smelling of whiskey and promises, then left again. One morning, the landlord told me kindness had limits. So I wrapped Clara in a quilt, put 2 dresses in a paper sack, and walked until my shoes bled." She gave a small, bitter smile. "There, does that satisfy the ledger?" "No," Daniel said, "but it honors it." The answer seems to unsettle her. She looks down. "Evelyn found me behind the church kitchen," Maggie said. "Your grandmother was tall, even then. White blonde hair pinned up like a crown she had forgotten she was wearing. She had large hands, warm hands, the kind that made a crying baby quiet without showing off about it. She did not ask why I had no coat. She did not ask what I had done wrong. She said, 'There is soup at the house, and no one has to explain hunger before supper.'" Daniel saw his grandmother so clearly that the room blurred for a moment. Evelyn moving through Willow Lantern House with a dish towel over one shoulder, making people feel less ashamed by refusing to treat shame as useful. "Maggie," he said softly, "what happened?" "What always happens when a fool is loved well." Her eyes flashed, but tears had gathered beneath the spark. "I resented her for seeing me. She told me not to go back to Frank. She said Clara deserved a house where footsteps did not make her flinch. I heard judgment where there was mercy. I heard pity where there was warning. So when Frank returned with flowers and a borrowed car, I left Willow Lantern House in the middle of a thaw. I told myself I was choosing my family." "And were you?" "No. I was choosing the version of myself that did not need saving." Her voice thinned. "It took me years to admit there is no such woman." A gust of wind pushed snow against the window. Benny woke, sneezed, and attempted to crawl over Hazel's shoulder. Hazel pinned him gently with her chin. The absurd dignity of it made Daniel almost smile. Maggie noticed and let out a breath that might have been a laugh, or grief passing through a narrow door. "Clara remembers none of it," Maggie said. "She was barely walking. She is 52 now. Clara Lawson, my daughter, is tall like her father but built stronger with sandy blonde hair she cuts at her jaw because she says long hair gets in the way at the clinic. Her eyes are gray-green, always tired lately, and she has the calm hands of a nurse who can clean a wound while telling someone not to be foolish. Patients in town adore her. With me, she is polite in the way a locked gate is polite. She does not hate me. Hatred would require more energy than I have left her. Daniel absorbed that quietly. You live in the same town. 14 minutes apart. We have perfected distance. Why? Maggie looked at the ledger again. Because I raised her to be strong the wrong way. I punished softness because I was ashamed of my own. When she cried, I corrected her posture. When she needed comfort, I gave advice. When she made mistakes, I heard Frank's promises and Evelyn's warning, and my own foolishness all tangled together, and I came down on her like winter off a roof. Daniel thought of Rebecca, of her careful voice on the phone, of how many times he had treated concern like interference. Family, he was beginning to understand, was often a house full of locked rooms where everyone blamed the doors. Maggie reached into the suitcase and removed a cream-colored envelope tied with blue thread. Her fingers trembled now, and this time she did not hide it. I found this last month in a box from the church attic. Evelyn wrote it, but never mailed it. Or perhaps she meant to give it to me when I came back. She swallowed. I did not come back. Daniel watched her unfold the paper. The room seems to lean closer. Maggie read in a low voice, rough but steady. Maggie, one day when you no longer need to prove you are strong, come back. The porch light will still be on. Nothing in the cabin moved for several seconds except the fire. Maggie pressed the letter flat with both hands as if it might fly away, though it had waited half a century to be read aloud. Daniel looked from the letter to the ledger, from the ledger to Hazel and her sleeping pups, and then toward the window where the road to town lay buried under snow. Until that morning, Willow Lantern House had been a problem of beams, taxes, and signatures. Now it had a woman's name in it, a baby's name, his grandmother's hand. A porch light that had been left burning in ink long after the woman who lit it was gone. Selling Willow Lantern House, Daniel realized, would not be selling a building. It would be closing a door someone had spent a lifetime trying to return to. Morning had not truly arrived in Leavenworth. It had only thinned the dark enough for the mountains to appear as pale shoulders behind the falling snow. Daniel Miller cleared the windshield of his old black pickup with a gloved hand, while Maggie Lawson stood on the porch holding the blue suitcase against her side, as if someone might still try to take it from her. Hazel refused the truck at first. The 4-year-old German Shepherd mother planted her raw paws in the snow and lowered her sable head, amber eyes fixed on Daniel with weary accusation. She had survived one night under his roof, but survival was not the same as trust. Daniel understood that better than he wanted to. He opened the rear door, laid a blanket across the seat, placed Benny on it first, and then waited. Benny, bold as a tiny general with milk on his whiskers, immediately attempted to conquer the seatbelt. Pearl, smaller and quieter, lay wrapped in a towel against Daniel's chest, her little black and tan body too light beneath the fabric. Only when Hazel saw Pearl safely in Daniel's arms did the mother dog climb into the truck, stiff-legged and suspicious, positioning herself so her body touched both puppies and her gaze could still reach Daniel in the mirror. She looks at you like she is reviewing your moral character, Maggie said as Daniel helped her into the passenger seat. Most mothers do, Daniel answered. Maggie gave him a sideways look, almost approving, then turned toward the road without smiling. The drive down from the cabin was slow. Snow softened the ditches and hid the edges of the road, and Daniel guided the truck with the quiet attention of a man who had once trusted maps less than tire marks, and weather more than promises. Maggie sat rigid beside him, the blue suitcase at her feet. She had slept little, spoken less, and now that they were driving toward Clara Lawson, all the sharpness in her seemed to have turned inward. Daniel could feel it in the truck cab, the way a room feels different when someone is trying not to cry. You do not have to come inside, Maggie said after several minutes. No, Daniel said. I do. Because of the meeting? Because Pearl is weak. Maggie looked at the towel bundle in his arm. Pearl's nose twitched once, a tiny movement that seemed to demand a witness. Clara works at the Cascade Family Clinic, Maggie said. She is not a veterinarian. You said she volunteers with a shelter. On Thursdays, and whenever someone leaves kittens in a cardboard box behind the laundromat, which is apparently a local hobby for cowards. That should have sounded bitter. Instead, it sounded like a mother trying to explain her daughter without praising her too openly. The clinic sat near the lower end of town, a modest white building with blue trim, a shoveled ramp, and a row of muddy cars beneath a sign that read Cascade Family Clinic. Inside, the waiting room smelled of disinfectant, wet wool, and coffee left too long on a warmer. A wooden rack held pamphlets about blood pressure, flu shots, grief groups, and winter falls. Clara Lawson stood behind the front desk, speaking to an elderly man with a cane. She was 52, tall and straight-backed, with sandy blonde hair cut at her jaw, gray-green eyes, and a face that had learned calm the way nurses often did. Not because the world was gentle, but because panic needed at least one adult in the room. She wore navy scrubs under a cream cardigan, and her hands were broad, capable, and gentle with the man's insurance card. When she looked up and saw Maggie, that calm did not break. It closed. "Mom?" Clara said. Not cold enough to be cruel, not warm enough to be safe. Maggie's fingers tightened on the suitcase handle. "Clara!" Daniel stepped forward with Pearl and the towel. "Ma'am, the puppy had a rough night. She is breathing, but she is weak." Clara's eyes moved to him, then to Pearl, then to Hazel, standing in the doorway with Benny pressed beneath her chest. Concern crossed Clara's face before she could defend against it. "Bring her over here." She came around the desk quickly, her movements efficient but not harsh. Hazel growled. Clara stopped at once, lowered her body slightly, and turned one shoulder away from the dog rather than facing her head-on. "Easy, Mama," Clara said softly. "No one is taking your baby." Daniel noticed that voice. It was not the voice Clara had used for Maggie. It was warmer, unguarded, worn smooth by use. Hazel did not relax, but she stopped growling. Clara examined Pearl without taking her fully from the towel, checking the pup's gums, warmth, and tiny paws with careful fingers. "She needs warmth, sugar, fluids, and a vet if she does not perk up soon. I have puppy supplement gel in my car from the shelter." Then Clara looked at Maggie again. "Why are you here?" The question had too many rooms inside it. Maggie lifted the suitcase slightly. "I need you to come to the town meeting. Willow Lantern House." Clara's expression changed from guarded to tired. "No." Maggie blinked. "You have not heard what I need to say. I have heard versions of what you need to say my entire life." Clara stepped back, folding her arms over her cardigan. "Half stories, late stories, stories where the hard part is always just outside the frame." Maggie's chin rose by habit. Daniel saw the old weapon forming in her mouth, some clean, cutting sentence about respect or duty or how children nowadays believed pain was a profession. Maggie inhaled. Hazel shifted. Pearl made a faint, dry sound in Daniel's arms. It was barely a whimper, but it passed through the room like a small bell. Maggie looked down at the puppy, and something in her face loosened painfully, as if pride were a bandage being pulled from old skin. She closed her mouth. When she spoke again, her voice was lower. "I turned survival into an excuse not to apologize to you." Clara went very still. The old man with the cane stopped pretending not to listen. Daniel looked away, giving them what little privacy a clinic waiting room could provide. Maggie swallowed. "I thought if I made you strong enough, nothing could hurt you the way I had been hurt. But I did not make you strong, Clara. I made you lonely beside me." Clara's eyes shone, but her face did not soften. Not yet. "You do not get to fix that with one sentence." "I know." "Do you?" The question was not cruel, it was exhausted. Before Maggie could answer, the clinic door opened behind them, and Rebecca Miller stepped in with snow on the shoulders of her charcoal coat. Rebecca was 36, slim and neat, with chestnut hair pulled into a low knot, clear brown eyes behind square glasses, and a leather folder tucked under one arm. She had the composed expression of someone who had balanced too many checkbooks for people who preferred miracles to math. Her gaze went from Daniel to Maggie, then to the dogs. "Daniel," she said, "please tell me this is not your new plan for handling the property issue?" "It is not a plan." "That has never stopped you before." Her voice was dry, but worry sat beneath it.
Daniel stepped aside so she could see Pearl. Rebecca's face softened despite herself.
"Oh."
Clara returned from the back office with a small tube of supplement gel and a clean syringe without the needle. She handed them to Daniel, then demonstrated with her fingers how little to use. "Tiny amounts. Warm her first. Do not force too much." Daniel nodded. "Thank you." Clara looked at Maggie. "I am doing this for the puppy, not for my mother." Maggie flinched as though struck, but she did not defend herself. She only nodded once, accepting the wound because for once it belonged to the truth. Rebecca watched that exchange, her practical face troubled now, as if she had walked into a financial problem and found a family altar burning under the paperwork. Maggie turned toward the door, the blue suitcase hanging from her hand. She looked smaller leaving than she had entering, but not defeated. Daniel followed with Pearl, Hazel, and Benny. Behind them, Clara did not call Maggie back. She simply stood in the clinic doorway with snowlight on her face, holding herself together with both hands. It was not forgiveness. It was not even peace. But it was the first honest thing between mother and daughter in years. And sometimes, honesty entered a room like winter air, sharp, necessary, and impossible to ignore. Snow had softened by the time Daniel Miller turned the truck toward Willow Lantern House, falling no longer like warning, but like memory, slow and quiet over the narrow road that wound below the pines. Clara Lawson sat in the back seat beside Hazel, one hand resting near Pearl's towel without touching the puppy unless the mother dog allowed it. Clara had come reluctantly, and she had said so twice. The first time was to Daniel in the clinic parking lot. The second was to Maggie, who had not answered. Clara wore her cream cardigan beneath a navy winter coat now, her sandy blonde hair tucked behind one ear, her nurse's badge still clipped crookedly to her pocket. She looked like a woman who had stepped out of one life before finishing the sentence and entered another before deciding whether she wanted to belong in it. Hazel watched Clara's hand, suspicious but less hostile than before, as if the dog had decided this tall woman with gray-green eyes and tired kindness might be useful in keeping Pearl alive. Benny had fallen asleep with his nose pressed against Daniel's duffel bag, having apparently won several private wars against the zipper. Maggie sat in the passenger seat, the blue suitcase upright between her knees. The old woman had been silent since leaving the clinic. Silence on Maggie was not peace. It was a storm deciding where to land. Willow Lantern House stood at the bend where the lower road met a row of bare cottonwoods, its wide porch sagging under snow, its yellow paint faded to the color of old butter, its shutters hanging unevenly like tired eyelids. A small iron hook beside the front door still held the frame of a porch lantern, though the glass was gone. Daniel parked near the steps and let the engine idle for a moment. He had avoided looking at the house closely for years. From a distance, it had been easier to call it a liability. Up close, it became something worse, familiar. He remembered carrying firewood to that porch as a boy, remembered Evelyn Miller handing him a mug of cocoa and telling him every person who came through that door was carrying something heavier than snow. At 12, Daniel had thought she meant suitcases. At 40, he knew better. Rebecca had texted twice during the drive. First, meeting moved to 11, resort rep confirmed. Second, please do not make this harder than it has to be. Daniel had not answered. He placed the phone face down in the cup holder, because some truths needed more than a text message, and some decisions could not be made while looking at a glowing rectangle. Clara opened the rear door slowly. Hazel growled once, low and uncertain. Clara stopped, then spoke in that same calm, clinic voice. "I know, Mama. New place, bad day. Everybody is rude, especially humans." Benny woke and sneezed as if in agreement. Maggie gave the faintest snort. It was not forgiveness, it was not even warmth, but it was the first sound between mother and daughter that did not cut. Inside, Willow Lantern House smelled of dust, old pine, cold ashes, and the faint sourness of a building that had spent too long waiting to be useful. Daniel found the breaker box, but only half the lights worked. A weak bulb in the hallway flickered awake, showing hooks mounted low along one wall, child height, with little brass numbers beneath them. Clara stopped there. Her gloved fingers hovered near one of the hooks. "Were these for children?" "For coats," Maggie said. "Small coats. Wet mittens. Paper bags with everything someone owned." Her voice was steady, but Daniel saw her throat move. "Your blue hat hung there." Clara looked at her sharply. "I had a blue hat? With a white pom-pom. You hated it. You kept pulling it off and throwing it at Mrs. Miller's cat." Daniel glanced up. "My grandmother had a cat?" "Enormous gray thing," Maggie said. "Mean as a church committee. Name was Bishop." Against all expectation, Clara smiled. It arrived quickly and left quickly, but it had been there. "I threw hats at a cat named Bishop." "You had strong opinions." "I wonder where I got that." Maggie deserved the jab, and for once she accepted it without lifting a shield. She walked ahead into the common room, one hand on the suitcase, the other brushing the backs of chairs draped in dust cloths. The room had a broad stone fireplace, a long table scarred by decades of plates and elbows, shelves stacked with chipped mugs, and a piano against the far wall. The piano was upright, dark walnut, its top filmed with dust and its keys yellowed at the edges. Above it hung a framed sampler stitched in blue thread. "No one explains hunger before supper." Clara read the words. Her face changed, not dramatically, but carefully, as if some inner door had opened only a crack. "That sounds like something she would say." "Evelyn?" Daniel asked. Maggie nodded. "She said it the night I arrived. I was so ashamed I could barely swallow. She put soup in front of me and turned away so I could eat without being watched." Maggie set the suitcase on the long table. "Mercy can be very polite when it wants to save a proud fool." Clara did not speak. She walked to a cupboard and opened it. Inside were folded quilts, faded but clean beneath dust, each made from mismatched cloth, flannel, gingham, old shirt cotton, a square with tiny ducks, another with red roses. Clara touched one and drew her hand back as if the fabric had spoken. "These were ordinary," she said. "Yes," Maggie answered. "That was the miracle." The simplicity of it struck Daniel harder than any hidden vault would have. There were no dramatic secrets on the walls. No grand treasure, just low hooks, patched quilts, a cold kitchen, a piano with tired strings, and the evidence of many small salvations performed without applause. A bowl washed, a child warmed, a woman allowed to sleep without explaining how she had failed. He looked around and felt ashamed of every time he had reduced this place to repair costs. Outside, an engine growled along the road. The snowplow came around the bend, blades scraping pavement with a harsh, metallic roar. Hazel erupted. The mother dog sprang up so fast Benny rolled sideways in his blanket. Pearl, tucked near Clara's coat, squeaked. Before Daniel could reach for either pup, Hazel seized Pearl gently by the scruff and bolted across the common room. "Hazel!" Daniel moved on instinct. Clara caught his sleeve. "Wait! She's taking the weak pup under furniture in a cold room." "And if you rush her, she may panic worse." Clara's voice was firm now, the nurse in her standing shoulder to shoulder with something older and more wounded. "She thinks the noise means danger. Let her hide. Then give her a reason to come back." Hazel had vanished beneath the piano, Pearl tucked under her chest. Only the gleam of amber eyes showed in the shadow between the petals. Daniel forced himself to stop. Every trained part of him objected. Stopping felt like losing. Waiting felt like negligence. But Clara did not release his sleeve until his breathing changed. Maggie lowered herself slowly to the dusty floor. Her knees did not like it, her face admitted nothing. She sat several feet from the piano, hands folded in her lap.
"I used to sit right there," she said, not looking at Clara, "on a cushion because the bench wobbled. You would not sleep unless I sang. Evelyn said you had a soul that required negotiation." Clara stood very still. Maggie began to sing, the same lullaby from Daniel's cabin, but softer now, shaped by the room that had first held it. Her voice cracked on the second line. She started again. Dust floated through the thin light. The plow passed outside and faded down the road. Hazel's growl weakened into a trembling breath. Pearl made a small rooting motion against her mother's fur. Clara's eyes filled, though she did not wipe them. Perhaps she was seeing it at last. Not the mother who corrected grief into posture, not the old woman armed with sarcasm, but a frightened young Maggie, sitting at a broken piano with a baby in her arms, singing because singing was the only wealth she had left. Hazel shifted beneath the piano. One paw scraped the floorboards, then another. A brittle, clicking sound followed. Daniel crouched. "There's something loose under there." Clara knelt beside him, keeping her body angled away from Hazel. Maggie kept singing, barely above a whisper now. Hazel backed out first, Pearl still against her, then settled near Clara's knees as if she had not just reorganized the laws of trust. Daniel reached under the piano and pulled at a warped board Hazel's claws had exposed. Beneath it sat a small tin box decorated with faded blue flowers. Its lid rusted at one corner. Maggie stopped singing. Daniel opened the box carefully. Inside, wrapped in oil paper, lay a folded copy of a land grant and a handwritten addendum bearing Evelyn Miller's signature. He read it once, silently, then aloud, his voice changing with every word. Willow Lantern House had been deeded to the Miller family under one condition: as long as the property could reasonably serve public shelter, recovery, or community care, it was not to be sold for private development. The house seemed to hold its breath around them. Clara looked at Maggie. Maggie looked at the piano. Daniel looked at the paper in his hands, and understood that Willow Lantern House had not produced a miracle. It had produced a responsibility. The old house had not been waiting to be remembered. It had been waiting to be kept. By the time Daniel Miller reached Leavenworth Town Hall, the snow had begun to melt along the sidewalks, turning the edges of the street into gray slush that reflected shop lights and passing tires. Willow Lantern House had given them a paper, but paper did not shovel roofs, repair foundations, or convince practical people to believe in a future that came with invoices. Daniel knew that before he opened the truck door. The folded land grant rested inside his coat pocket, close to his chest, while Maggie Lawson carried the old ledger in both hands, as if it were a sleeping child. Clara had insisted on stopping by the clinic first, where Hazel, Benny, and Pearl could rest in a warm supply room under her co-worker's watch. That was the only reason the mother dog had allowed Pearl out of Daniel's arms. Even then, Hazel had stared at him with a look that said every human promise remained under review. Town Hall was a brick building with white columns and a bell tower too small to be majestic but too stubborn to be decorative. Inside, folding chairs filled the meeting room. Retirees in wool coats sat beside shop owners, church volunteers, contractors, and people who came to public meetings because disagreement gave winter evenings a shape. At the front table sat Mayor Alice Grant, a 64-year-old woman with short silver hair, warm brown skin, and reading glasses hanging from a red cord around her neck. Alice had a calm, school principal presence, the kind that could make a room lower its voice without quite knowing why. Beside her sat 3 council members and a man Daniel had seen only in emails, Nolan Pierce from Cascade Hearth Resorts. Nolan was in his late 40s, handsome in the polished way of hotel brochures, with sandy hair combed neatly back, a square jaw shaved smooth, and a navy overcoat that looked too expensive for a town that salted its own steps. His smile was courteous, but his eyes moved like a calculator. Rebecca Miller stood near the front row, a folder hugged to her chest. She wore the same charcoal coat from the clinic, her chestnut hair tidy despite the damp weather, her face composed in a way Daniel recognized from childhood. Rebecca looked most controlled when she was most afraid. When she saw Daniel, her eyes flicked to Maggie's ledger, then to the shape of the paper inside his coat pocket. "Please tell me you found something useful," she murmured. "We found something complicated." "That is not a category lenders respect." Maggie heard her and surprised Daniel by answering gently, "No, dear, it is not." The meeting began with minutes, motions, and the dry language by which communities made painful choices sound organized. Mayor Grant summarized the issue. Willow Lantern House was deteriorating. The Miller family held title, Cascade Hearth Resorts had made a purchase offer, and the town had been asked to release its informal preservation interest so development could proceed. Nolan Pierce spoke next. He described jobs, tax revenue, winter tourism, tasteful architecture, and a small plaque honoring the history of the property. His voice was smooth enough that several people nodded before deciding whether they agreed. "We believe," Nolan said, palms open, "that honoring the past and investing in the future do not have to be enemies." It was a good sentence. Daniel disliked how good it was. Then came the objections Daniel had expected, and some he had not. A hardware store owner named Paul Mercer, a thick-necked man in his 50s with a gray mustache and cracked hands, said the town needed business, not another charity project that would ask for donations every December. A retired teacher with blue-white curls said children should know the house's history, but she doubted history would keep pipes from bursting. A younger mother in a parka stood up with a baby on her hip and said she loved the idea of a shelter, but she already drove 40 minutes for childcare and could not volunteer for one more beautiful cause. None of them sounded cruel. That made it harder. Daniel had fought obvious enemies before. Ordinary reasonableness was harder to meet with courage. Rebecca rose slowly when Mayor Grant called her name. Daniel's stomach tightened. His sister looked smaller at the microphone, but not weak. She opened her folder and laid out the numbers: roof damage, plumbing, heating system, insurance, code compliance, accessibility repairs, taxes, emergency reserves. She did not exaggerate. She did not sneer. She simply told the truth in figures. "My brother and I inherited Willow Lantern House," Rebecca said, voice steady. "We also inherited what it meant to our grandmother. I know that matters. But meaning does not pay contractors. If this town wants the house saved, then the town cannot let one family carry the cost because everyone enjoys the story." The room went quiet. Daniel looked at her, and shame moved through him with the old familiarity of cold water. Rebecca was right. He had been angry at her for speaking in numbers because numbers could not kneel beside a frightened puppy or read Evelyn's letter aloud. But numbers could reveal a different wound, the exhaustion of the person left holding the bill while everyone else admired the memory. Mayor Grant nodded. "Thank you, Rebecca." Daniel stood next, but when he reached for the paper in his coat, Maggie touched his sleeve. "Let me go first." He wanted to object. He wanted to protect her from the room, from Nolan Pierce's polite eyes, from Clara's silence near the aisle. But Maggie Lawson had spent too many years being protected from the wrong truths. So Daniel stepped back. Maggie walked to the microphone with the old ledger pressed against her chest. She was 78, small in her lavender cardigan and brown coat, her silver hair pinned with black clips, her back straighter than her knees wanted it to be. She looked at the room, and for once she did not sharpen herself before speaking. "My name is Margaret Lawson," she said. "Many of you know me as the woman who corrected your Christmas singing and returned casseroles with notes about salt." A few people laughed softly.
Maggie nodded, accepting the laugh without hiding inside it. More than 50 years ago, I came to Willow Lantern House with my baby daughter and nothing else worth naming. Evelyn Miller gave us soup, a bed, and quiet. I repaid her by leaving in anger, because she had the nerve to see what I was too proud to admit.
Clara lowered her gaze. Maggie opened the ledger.
This book holds names, not saints, not success stories tied with ribbon. Just people who needed one safe night, one warm meal, one place where shame did not have to introduce itself before supper. Her voice trembled, but she did not stop. Willow Lantern House did not make me wise. I left foolish. It did not fix my marriage. It did not turn me into a better mother overnight. It gave me time. Enough time to make another choice, even if I did not make it well. That matters. Daniel saw Clara then, really saw her. The daughter was not smiling. Tears had not made her soft, but something rigid in her face had loosened. For years, Clara had waited not for a perfect apology, but for her mother to stand in public without blaming weather, men, fear, youth, or hunger.
Maggie was doing it now. Late, yes. Imperfectly, yes. But standing. Daniel followed with the land grant. Mayor Grant read the addendum twice, then passed it to the town attorney, a narrow man with a bald head and careful fingers. Nolan Pierce's smile dimmed but did not vanish. He asked whether reasonably serve could be legally interpreted given the building's condition. Rebecca folded her arms, not triumphant, not defeated, simply alert. The room argued for another hour, not cruelly, not beautifully, just honestly. Could the house serve again? Who would pay? Who would manage it? Would it be shelter, community care, animal recovery, or another noble plan that collapsed under bake sales and good intentions? At last, Mayor Grant removed her glasses. "We will not approve sale release today," she said, "but we will not pretend sentiment is a business plan either. Daniel Miller, if you and your family wish to preserve Willow Lantern House, this council will grant 60 days. Bring us a workable model, funding commitments, safety estimates, and community partners. Winter shelter, recovery space, animal care, whatever you believe this house can honestly become. In 60 days, we revisit." No applause came. That was good. Applause would have made it feel finished. Daniel looked at Rebecca. She looked back with tired warning and reluctant hope. Maggie closed the ledger. Clara stood near the aisle, her hands tucked into the sleeves of her cardigan, watching her mother as if seeing not a wall, but a woman finally leaning against one. Daniel had not won. Willow Lantern House had not been saved. Not yet. But the door had not closed, and sometimes time was the first shape mercy took when it entered a room full of frightened people. The first week after the town meeting, Willow Lantern House looked less like a place being saved than a place being argued with. Snow melted from the porch roof, found every weak shingle Daniel Miller had missed, and dripped into pans, buckets, coffee cans, and one soup pot Maggie Lawson declared too ugly for food anyway. Daniel had arrived with a clipboard, a tool belt, and a schedule divided into neat columns: roof, heat, plumbing, kitchen, animal room, volunteer coordination, budget review. He had written it the way he once planned missions, believing that if every weakness had a number beside it, fear would behave. The house did not behave. The back door jammed whenever the temperature dropped. The hallway light worked only when someone insulted it. A pipe beneath the kitchen sink coughed brown water onto Daniel's boots on the third morning, and Benny, now brighter-eyed and rounder through the belly, stole one of his leather gloves and dragged it triumphantly beneath the piano like a conquering wolf who had found a buffalo. "That dog has no respect for chain of command," Daniel said, kneeling with one arm under the piano. Maggie, sitting nearby with a mug of tea and a stack of fundraiser flyers, replied, "Benny is the only one in this building with clear priorities." Hazel lay near the fireplace with Pearl tucked against her side.
watching the room with the cautious dignity of a queen whose kingdom had too many ladders, strangers, and opinions. The German shepherd mother was gaining strength, her sable coat beginning to shine again beneath the dust of the old house. But trust came to her in teaspoons. She allowed Daniel to pass within 6 feet without growling. 4 if he carried food, 3 if Clara stood nearby. Anyone else had to earn the right to be ignored. Clara came after shifts at Cascade Family Clinic, still in navy scrubs beneath her winter coat, her sandy blonde hair clipped back, her nurse's hands gentle and exact as she checked Pearl's weight and Hazel's healing paws. She did not come for Maggie, at least not aloud. She came for Pearl's supplement schedule, for Benny's worming dose, for Hazel's coat, for the shelter paperwork Daniel did not understand. Yet somehow, she also began leaving soup in Maggie's reach, correcting the old woman's scarf before a draft found her neck, and staying 5 minutes longer than necessary each time. Maggie pretended not to notice.
This fooled no one, least of all Hazel, who had become an expert in watching humans circle what they wanted without approaching it directly. Volunteers arrived in uneven waves. Some came out of guilt after Maggie's speech. Some came because Mayor Alice Grant had called them personally, in the sweet, terrifying tone that made refusal feel like failing a civics exam. Earl Whitaker, a retired plumber of 71, appeared with a red nose, a white beard, and suspenders stretched over a belly that had clearly enjoyed every pie ever offered to it. Earl had a booming laugh, a left knee replaced twice, and the habit of talking to pipes as if they were stubborn farm animals. "This one's sulking," he told Daniel from beneath the sink. "You cannot rush a sulking pipe." Linda Mae Carson came on Thursdays with 3 widows from the Methodist choir. Linda Mae was 68, tall and soft-shouldered, with dark skin, silver curls, and a voice rich enough to make even Scales sound forgiving. She had lost her husband to a heart attack 5 winters earlier and had survived by feeding everyone else before admitting she was hungry. Maggie began teaching them old hymns and simple folk songs for a fundraising supper. At first, her direction was ruthless. "Ethel, dear, that note did not die for your sin, so stop burying it." But the women laughed, and Clara, listening from the doorway one evening, heard something in her mother's voice she had not heard since childhood. Not command, exactly, but life returning in rhythm. Rebecca Miller became involved by accident, then by exasperation, then by love. She arrived one Saturday with a laptop, 3 binders, and the expression of a woman entering a barn fire with a spreadsheet. She was still practical, still wary, still unwilling to let hope spend money it did not have. She walked room to room, taking notes on repair estimates, insurance requirements, donor pledges, and the council's 60-day deadline. When Daniel tried to wave away a grant application as paperwork for later, Rebecca looked at him over her square glasses. Later is where unpaid bills breed. He almost argued. Then he stopped. That was new. "Tell me what to do," he said. Rebecca blinked once, surprised enough to show the little sister beneath the accountant. "You mean that?" "Do not make it emotional." "Too late. I may frame it." She agreed to handle the books on one condition. Daniel stopped working before midnight, ate actual meals, and slept somewhere other than a chair with a drill in his hand. Daniel did not promise well. Promises felt too much like hostages given to the future. But he began trying. He failed, often. Rebecca noticed that too, and instead of scolding, she left sandwiches wrapped in wax paper with notes that read, "Consume before becoming unbearable." The house slowly learned people again. A corner room became a warming space with donated cots. The old pantry became a supply closet stacked with towels, canned soup, dog food, blankets, batteries, and the kind of practical mercy that did not need poetry to be holy. Daniel built a low wooden gate for the future animal recovery room, and Hazel inspected every joint with grave suspicion. Pearl grew stronger in small increments that felt enormous to those counting them. 1 ounce gained, then 2, a steadier latch,
a tiny bark that startled even herself. Maggie held the puppy afterward and whispered, "There now. Even the smallest bell gets to ring." Clara heard it and looked away, not because she was untouched, but because being touched by her mother still confused her. Some wounds did not close because someone found the right sentence. They closed like winter leaving a mountain, one thaw, one freeze, one clear drop at a time. Near the end of the third week, Daniel woke in his cabin with his heart hammering and the dark crowded around him. The dream had already broken apart, leaving only fragments. Cold metal under his palms, water where there should have been floor, a voice he could not reach, a door that would not open fast enough. He sat on the edge of the bed, breathing through his teeth, ashamed of fear, though no one had asked him to be brave. For several minutes he stared at the black window. Then he pulled on boots and drove down to Willow Lantern House to check the furnace, because that sounded more respectable than admitting he did not want to be alone with the night. The house stood quiet under moonlit snow, porch lamp glowing weakly above the repaired steps. He unlocked the door and stepped inside, expecting darkness. Instead, he found Maggie at the long kitchen table, wrapped in a shawl, drinking tea from a chipped blue mug. Hazel lay at her feet, one amber eye opening as Daniel entered. Benny and Pearl slept in a basket near the stove, a tangle of paws and soft breathing. Maggie did not ask why he was there. She did not ask what he had dreamed. She only reached for the teapot and poured into a second mug. Daniel stood in the doorway, caught between leaving and belonging. "Sit down before you let all the heat out," Maggie said. So he sat. The silence between them did not rise like a wall this time. It waited like an empty chair pulled back from the table. And Daniel, for once, let himself take it. By the end of 60 days, spring had not arrived in Leavenworth so much as negotiated its way in. One thawed gutter and one stubborn patch of snow at a time. Willow Lantern House stood under a pale morning sky with fresh paint on the porch rail, a repaired roof that no longer surrendered to every cloud, and a new wooden sign hanging beside the front steps. Daniel Miller had carved the letters himself, slowly, with the concentration of a man learning that some work could not be forced by strength alone. Willow Lantern House. The porch light stays on. The words were uneven in two places. Rebecca noticed. She did not mention it. That was how Daniel knew she liked it. The opening was called a trial, because town councils loved cautious words. One year, Mayor Alice Grant had said, adjusting her red-corded glasses while signing the agreement. 1 year to prove the house could serve winter shelter, community care, and animal recovery without drowning the Miller family in debt or asking sentiment to do the work of a budget. Rebecca Miller stood beside Daniel during the signing, slim and composed in a navy blazer, chestnut hair tucked behind her ears, a binder full of donor pledges under one arm. She had become treasurer before anyone officially asked her, which everyone agreed was safest. "Hope is allowed," she told Daniel afterward, "but hope will submit receipts." There was no grand crowd on opening day. No band, no ribbon cutting, because Maggie Lawson said scissors near old people and nervous dogs were an invitation to comedy and lawsuits. Instead, there was a yellow porch light glowing even though the sun was up, 3 clean beds in the warming room, a small soup kitchen that smelled of chicken broth and thyme, and a converted back room with washable mats, donated crates, and a low gate Daniel had rebuilt twice after Hazel judged the first version inadequate. Hazel, the sable German shepherd mother, lay near that gate with her head resting on her paws, amber eyes following each stranger. She was healthier now, her black saddle glossy, cream chest clean, ribs no longer showing beneath her coat. But she still did not hand out trust like church flyers. If someone moved too fast, one ear tilted back, and the whole room remembered manners. Benny had no such caution. The sturdy German shepherd puppy had grown into a cheerful menace with oversized paws,
a thick black and tan coat, and the confidence of a mayor who had never lost an election. He attacked a donated sock near the hearth, shook it with unnecessary drama, and fell over backward in triumph. Pearl, still smaller, with her narrow face and soft, dark eyes, slept on the folded edge of a quilt near the open blue suitcase. Her coppery tan markings had deepened, and though she still tired faster than her brother, her little bark could now startle 3 adults and offend 1 soup pot. Daniel watched them from the porch doorway, one hand resting near the frame. He had become Hazel's temporary foster on paper, though the town had quietly decided the dogs had fostered him first. He still woke some nights before dawn, heart pounding, old memories arriving without knocking. He still measured rooms too quickly and trusted quiet too much. But now, when the dark pressed close, he had somewhere to go besides deeper into himself. He could check the stove at Willow Lantern House. He could tighten a loose hinge. He could stand on the porch until Hazel came to the door, looked at him with weary intelligence, and reminded him that being alive meant answering the morning, whether or not the night had been kind. The first guests came without ceremony. Ruth Bell arrived with a canvas bag, a swollen ankle, and a pride so delicate it had thorns. She was 74, widowed, small and round-shouldered, with white curls tucked under a purple hat and pale blue eyes that apologized before her mouth did. Her furnace had failed 2 nights earlier, but she had not wanted to be a bother, which Maggie declared one of the most dangerous phrases in the English language. Behind Ruth came Miriam Shaw, 69, a former school bus driver with deep brown skin, silver braids, and a laugh that filled the hall before her boots crossed the threshold. Miriam was not staying. She had brought a pot of beans, 3 blankets, and a warning that she would return if anyone tried to praise her too much. Maggie received them at the long table with a clipboard she did not need, and a cardigan buttoned wrong by 1 button. At 78, she still looked breakable, only to people who did not know porcelain could cut. Her silver hair was pinned more neatly than usual, though 1 curl had escaped near her cheek. She had softened in ways that did not make her gentle all at once. She still corrected Linda May's alto line during rehearsal. She still told Daniel his coffee tasted like a boot remembering rain. But she had stopped using sharpness as a locked door. Sometimes it was only a walking stick now, something to lean on while moving forward. Clara Lawson arrived late, as she often did after clinic shifts, carrying an apple pie covered in foil. She wore navy scrubs beneath a gray coat, her sandy blonde hair wind-tossed, her face tired in the honest way of someone who had cared for other people all day and still chosen to come. She did not rush to Maggie. She did not call her mom with sudden tenderness because life was not a choir number and wounds did not obey opening day schedules. Instead, she set the pie on the kitchen counter and joined Maggie beside the old piano, where 3 women from the winter shelter group waited with song sheets. They taught 1 song together, not perfectly. Maggie corrected the rhythm, Clara corrected Maggie's volume, Linda May laughed until she had to sit down, and Ruth Bell, who had sworn she did not sing, hummed the last verse so softly that Pearl lifted her head from the suitcase and blinked toward the sound. Daniel stood in the doorway and listened. Rebecca sat at the table balancing the repair fund, pretending she was not listening. Hazel stretched out near her pups and let Miriam step over her without growling. That small permission passed through the room like a candle being lit. Later, when the sun had lowered into a weak gold over the wet porch boards, Maggie carried the blue suitcase outside. It no longer held hidden letters, land grants, or the names of people she had been too ashamed to remember. Those papers were copied, filed, framed, or placed in the care of Rebecca's terrifying binder system. The suitcase itself remained, battered and blue, with its corners worn pale and its handle darkened by many frightened hands. Maggie set it open on the porch bench. Inside, she placed wool socks, folded scarves, 2 blank notebooks, sharpened pencils, peppermint candies, and the small card written in her careful church music handwriting. For the one who has carried too much alone, set it down here for a while.
Clara stepped onto the porch with 2 slices of pie on chipped plates.
She read the card. For a moment, neither woman spoke. Forgiveness did not descend like sunlight in a painting. It stood between them in work boots, unsure where to place its hands. "Are you teaching that song again next week?" Clara asked at last. Maggie looked toward Daniel, who was adjusting the porch lantern even though it was already straight. She looked at Hazel lying in the weak sun, at Benny wrestling the old sock, at Pearl asleep with her chin on the edge of the open suitcase. Then she looked back at her daughter. "Yes," Maggie said. Her voice trembled once, then held. "I'll be here." The blue suitcase stayed open as the porch light warmed the evening. Healing, Willow Lantern House seems to whisper, was not the art of packing the past away neatly. It was placing the past where light could touch it, so the next person through the door would know they did not have to carry everything alone. Sometimes God does not send a miracle with thunder or bright light. Sometimes He sends it through a trembling old woman, a tired soldier, a guarded mother dog, and a blue suitcase full of things that should have been spoken long ago. This story reminds us that healing rarely begins when life is perfect. It begins when someone finally opens the door, tells the truth, and lets another person see the burden they have carried alone. Maggie could not change the years she lost. Daniel could not erase the nights that still haunted him. Clara could not forgive on command. But grace gave them time, a warm room, a porch light, and one small reason to stay. In everyday life, we often judge broken people too quickly, forgetting that many are simply waiting for a safe place to set down their pain. If this story touched your heart, please share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment telling us where you are watching from, and subscribe for more stories of faith, loyalty, and second chances. May God bless you, protect your family, comfort your old wounds, and help you recognize the quiet miracles He places at your door.